They found the photograph that shouldn't exist in the winter of 1974. Faded, curled at the edges, yellowed by time. 3 figures standing before a ramshackle cabin, their faces blurred not by camera motion, but by something else entirely. The 2 adults stood rigid, hands clasped before them, while between them stood a child whose features seemed to shift the longer you stared. Local historian Margaret Caldwell, who first examined the photograph, described a sensation of vertigo when focusing on the child's face. "It was as if I was looking at something that wasn't meant to be seen," she would later write in her journal. Something that existed between moments rather than in them. The photograph had been discovered during the demolition of the old Harlan County Records Office, tucked inside a water-damaged folder marked simply W, no date, no names, no context. Just that single letter and an image that raised more questions than it could possibly answer. But before we dive deeper into this discovery, you need to understand something about this region. The mountains of Harlan County have always held their secrets close. The hollows and ridges create natural barriers, isolating communities for generations. What happens in these shadowed valleys often stays there, buried beneath layers of silence, superstition, and survival. This is the story of the Whitford family, whose bloodline twisted through the most remote corners of the Appalachian Mountains for over a century. It's a story about isolation and what happens when family bonds grow too tight, when bloodlines double back on themselves like the mountain roads that rarely lead outsiders in. But it's also a story about something else, something that defies easy explanation, something that lurks in the spaces between documented fact and local legend. The investigation begins in earnest in 1974, but to understand what was discovered, we must first go back to the aftermath of the Civil War, when the Whitford name first appears in county records. We'll examine documents long thought destroyed, speak with witnesses who've remained silent for decades, and piece together a history that some believe was deliberately erased. The journey will take us from crumbling courthouses to abandoned homesteads, from medical archives to forgotten family cemeteries hidden deep in the Kentucky wilderness. What follows is the result of 3 years of investigation. Names have not been changed. Dates and locations are presented as accurately as possible, drawn from what few official records remain. Some of what you're about to hear has never been shared publicly before now. Some of it, perhaps, should have remained buried in the dark hollows where it was found. The first official record of the Whitford family in Harlan County appears in the 1870 census. Jeremiah Whitford, age 37, his wife Martha, age 22, and their 3 children, Elijah, age 6, Sarah, age 4, and infant Thomas, are listed as residing in a remote area that would later be known locally as Whitford Hollow. The census taker noted that the family lived beyond the last established road, requiring nearly a full day's journey by horseback to reach their homestead. Jeremiah is listed as a farmer and trapper, though later tax records indicate a modest income from supplying local coal operations with timber. What's notable about this first record is what it doesn't mention: the circumstances that brought the Whitfords to this particularly isolated region, or why they chose to settle in an area so removed from established communities that even the census taker remarked on the difficulty of reaching them. Local historian Dr. Thomas Jenkins of Eastern Kentucky University has spent decades studying settlement patterns in the region. The post-Civil War period saw numerous families seeking isolation, particularly those with complex histories or loyalties, Dr. Jenkins explained during our interview in his office, surrounded by maps of Appalachian migration patterns. But the Whitfords appear to have sought an extreme degree of separation, even by the standards of the time. They weren't just looking for privacy, they were hiding from something. What exactly they might have been hiding from remains unclear. County records from Boone County, West Virginia, show a Jeremiah Whitford charged with undefined crimes against nature in 1868, but whether this is the same man who would appear in Harlan County 2 years later cannot be definitively established. The Boone County Courthouse fire of 1889 destroyed most of the relevant files, leaving only a single notation in the county clerk's ledger. What we do know with certainty is that the Whitfords established themselves quickly in their remote hollow, building not just a single cabin, but eventually a cluster of structures that housed an expanding family. By the 1880 census, the original 3 children had grown to 8 with the addition of Rebecca, John, Mary, William, and Joseph, All were listed as living within the same household, despite some of the elder children being of marrying age. It's here that the first unusual pattern emerges in the documentation. The 1890 census shows that eldest son Elijah, now 26, had married and was living in a separate dwelling on the same property. His wife is listed as Sarah Whitford, age 24. Census records contain no indication that this Sarah was not his sister, the same Sarah listed in the original census. Marriage records that might clarify this relationship are conspicuously absent from county files. Dr. Eleanor Rhodes, anthropologist and author of Kinship Patterns in Isolated Appalachian Communities, notes that while cousin marriages were not uncommon in remote regions during this period, sibling marriages were both illegal and taboo. What we often see in the records are deliberate obfuscations, Dr. Rhodes explained. Names would be slightly altered, ages adjusted, or relationships intentionally miscategorized to hide consanguineous unions that crossed legal boundaries. Whether through deliberate falsification or simple error, the census records paint an increasingly complex picture of the Whitford family structure over subsequent decades. By 1900, the family occupied at least 5 separate dwellings within Whitford Hollow, with numerous children showing parentage that defies straightforward interpretation. Names repeat across generations with confusing frequency. 3 different Thomas Whitfords, 4 Sarah Whitfords, multiple Elijahs and Marthas. The 1900 census also contains the first official note of physical anomalies within the family. Census taker Philip Atkinson included a marginal note beside the entry for Thomas Whitford's household. Eldest boy shows marked deformity of spine and unusual facial structure. Family refused medical inquiry. This Thomas, presumably the infant listed in the original census and now in his 30s, had fathered 6 children, according to the record, though his wife's maiden name is listed simply as Whitford, with no given name recorded. These anomalies might have remained nothing more than curious footnotes in dusty records were it not for what happened in the spring of 1908. On April 17th of that year, County Dr. Walter Simmons was summoned to Whitford Hollow to attend to a difficult childbirth. His journal, preserved in the Eastern Kentucky Medical Historical Society archives, contains a disturbing account of what he encountered. Called to attend birth in the Whitford settlement, he wrote, "Journey of exceptional difficulty, guided by young boy who appeared simple in mind though fleet of foot. Arrived near midnight to find mother in distress after 2 days of labor. Child malpositioned, showing signs of severe abnormality. Despite intervention, infant survived only hours after delivery. Skull misshapen with additional malformations of limbs and facial features unlike any I have previously encountered in medical practice. When I suggested the body be transported to Harlan for further examination, family became hostile. Father, or perhaps grandfather, relationships unclear, insisted child be buried before dawn according to family custom. Departed at first light with strong impression. Further medical assistance would be unwelcome. Dr. Simmons made no subsequent visits to Whitford Hollow, according to his journals. Indeed, following this entry, the Whitford family seems to have actively avoided outside medical intervention for nearly 4 decades. Their names appear in no hospital records, birth certificates were filed sporadically, if at all, and death certificates are similarly absent for numerous individuals who, according to census data, should have passed away during this period. The family's isolation deepened during the coal boom years of the early 20th century. While much of Harlan County was transformed by mining operations, with company towns springing up and population density increasing, Whitford Hollow remained untouched. Tax maps from 1922 show that the Whitfords had somehow maintained ownership of over 800 acres of land, despite the aggressive land acquisition tactics of coal companies during this period. It doesn't make sense economically, explained retired land surveyor James Holbrook, who worked for the Eastern Kentucky Coal Corporation for over 30 years. That hollow had rich coal seams running right through it. We had the geological surveys to prove it. Every other family in the area sold their mineral rights, if not their land outright. But the Whitfords wouldn't even allow company representatives past the mouth of their hollow. After a while, the company just marked that area as deferred acquisition and worked around it. This economic anomaly raises another question. How did the Whitford family sustain itself without engaging with the broader economy that was transforming the region? Tax records show minimal reported income, certainly not enough to support what had grown to nearly 30 individuals across multiple households. Yet there are no records of Whitford seeking employment in the mines or timber operations, no indication of significant agricultural output being sold at local markets. Local rumors offered darker explanations. Clayton Munro, now 92 years old, and one of the few living residents who remembers the Whitfords from this period, shared stories passed down from his father, who delivered mail in the region from 1918 to 1943. "My daddy wouldn't go past the first Whitford place," Munro told us, sitting on the porch of his Harlan County home. "He'd leave the mail in a box they'd put up, and sometimes there'd be things in exchange. Pelts mostly, but sometimes other things. Daddy didn't talk about it much, but once he came home white as a sheet, told my mama he'd seen one of the Whitford women carrying something that wasn't right. Said it moved all wrong, had too many joints. Mama told him to hush, that it was just a deformed baby and to have Christian charity. But Daddy, he said it wasn't no baby at all. Said he didn't know what it was, but it sure wasn't a child of God." Such accounts, while compelling, must be approached with caution. Folk beliefs about isolated families often manifest as supernatural rumors, particularly when physical deformities are present. However, what cannot be disputed is the unusual degree of control the Whitfords maintained over their territory, and the effectiveness with which they limited outside contact. This isolation was briefly penetrated during the 1933 floods that devastated much of eastern Kentucky. Red Cross relief workers documented their attempts to reach families in remote areas affected by the disaster. In a report dated August 12, 1933, Relief Coordinator Margaret Hampton described an unsuccessful attempt to access Whitford Hollow. Team diverted to area locally referred to as Whitford Settlement following reports of extensive damage. Access road completely washed out, requiring team to proceed on foot. Approximately 1 mile into the hollow, progress was halted by 3 men with rifles who identified themselves as Whitfords. Men stated no assistance was required and instructed team to depart immediately. When asked about potential casualties or medical needs, spokesman indicated their family takes care of its own. Due to threatening nature of encounter and isolation of location, team withdrew to serve more receptive communities. Attached to Hampton's report was a concerning addendum. Local guide Samuel Tucker reported hearing what he described as unusual wailing from deeper in the hollow, unlike normal human crying. Tucker was visibly disturbed by the sound and refused to guide any subsequent attempts to access the area. The next significant documentation of the Whitford family comes from an unexpected source: military records. Despite their isolation, the Whitford family was not exempt from the draft during World War II. In 1942, 3 Whitford men of eligible age were ordered to report to the recruitment center in Harlan. Only one appeared: Joseph Whitford, age 20 according to his draft card. The medical examination records for Joseph Whitford have been preserved in military archives, though they were initially classified due to their unusual nature. Dr. Raymond Fisher, the examining physician, rejected Joseph for service and included detailed notes about his physical condition. Subject presents with multiple congenital abnormalities inconsistent with combat readiness. Spinal curvature severe, with pronounced thoracic deformity. Facial asymmetry marked with mandibular protrusion and irregular dentition. Most concerning are the structural abnormalities of hands and feet. Subject possesses 6 digits on each hand, with unusual joint configuration allowing movement patterns outside normal human range. Subject also demonstrates cognitive delays, struggling to follow basic instructions or communicate effectively. Dr. Fisher further noted that Joseph appeared significantly older than his stated age of 20, exhibiting physical characteristics more consistent with a man in his 40s. When questioned about this discrepancy, Joseph was unable or unwilling to provide clarification. Most disturbing was Dr. Fisher's final observation. Subject bears striking resemblance to photograph in medical texts of individuals suffering from extreme consanguinity effects. Recommend investigation of family medical history and living conditions. This recommendation was apparently taken seriously. In March of 1943, County Health Department official Robert Thornton was dispatched to Whitford Hollow to conduct a welfare check accompanied by 2 deputies from the sheriff's office. Their report documents a disturbing encounter. Proceeded approximately 2 miles into Hollow, before encountering first structure. A cabin in severe disrepair, Thornton wrote. No occupants visible. Continued half-mile further to larger clearing containing 3 cabins arranged in triangle formation, approached by approximately 12 individuals of varying ages, all showing similar physical characteristics. Unusually pale complexion, pronounced facial asymmetry, irregular gaits. Many appeared to have spinal deformities and unusual hand structures. The report continues, attempted to explain purpose of visit, but met with hostile reception. Elder male, identifying himself as Thomas Whitford, stated no assistance wanted or needed. When informed that investigation was mandatory due to concerns about public health and welfare of minors, situation escalated. Deputies observed additional family members emerging from woods carrying firearms. In interest of safety, team withdrew with intention to return with larger force. No such return visit is documented in county records. When asked why the investigation was apparently abandoned, former Harlan County Sheriff Willard Davis, who served from 1967 to 1982, offered a disturbing explanation. That follow-up got cancelled from higher up, Davis told us, during an interview at his retirement home in Lexington. Word came down from the judge that the Whitfords were to be left alone, unless there was a clear criminal complaint, and nobody was filing complaints, because nobody went near that hollow if they could help it. There were stories, but stories aren't evidence. When pressed about what stories he had heard, Davis became noticeably uncomfortable. Look, every rural county has its bogeyman tales. The Whitfords just happened to be ours. People said they practiced dark rituals up in that hollow, that they weren't entirely human anymore after generations of inbreeding. Some claimed they could move in ways people shouldn't be able to move, that they could appear and disappear in the woods like ghosts. But that's just superstition talking. Whether superstition or not, the Whitford family maintained their isolation successfully for another decade until the post-war modernization efforts of the 1950s finally penetrated their seclusion. In 1954, state educational authorities attempted to enforce mandatory schooling laws by sending social worker Eleanor James to assess the children in Whitford Hollow. James's report, filed with the Kentucky Department of Education on October 12, 1954, provides one of the most detailed accounts of the family's living conditions. Unlike previous visitors, James was apparently allowed further into the hollow, though not without resistance. Counted at least 17 children of apparent school age across 5 separate dwellings, she wrote. Living conditions severely substandard, lacking electricity, running water, or adequate sanitation. Children exhibited varying degrees of physical deformity and developmental delay. Most concerning was the apparent age of some mothers, with girls as young as 13 or 14 nursing infants. When questioned about these children's education, elder family members claimed to provide religious instruction at home. James documented her attempts to explain compulsory education laws and was told that book learning brings evil thoughts and that Whitford children learn Whitford ways. She noted that many of the children appeared unable to speak clearly, communicating instead through a system of gestures and vocalizations understood only within the family. Most disturbing was James's description of the family's physical appearance. While initial observation suggests effects of malnutrition and inbreeding, closer inspection reveals anomalies that seem to go beyond typical genetic disorders. Several individuals exhibited unusual joint flexibility, allowing limb movements that should be anatomically impossible. Skin has strange translucent quality, with visible veining that forms patterns unlike normal human vasculature. Many family members, particularly children, demonstrate unusual synchronization of movement, turning heads simultaneously or blinking in perfect unison without apparent communication. James recommended immediate intervention, including removal of the most at-risk children and medical evaluation for the entire family. Her report concluded with a personal observation that breaks from her otherwise professional tone. In 15 years of social work in the most deprived areas of Appalachia, I have never felt the sense of wrongness that permeated that hollow. These children require rescue not just from poverty and neglect, but from something I cannot name. What happened next represents one of the most disturbing aspects of this investigation. Eleanor James filed her report on October 12th. On October 14th, she returned to Whitford Hollow accompanied by 2 state troopers and a county health nurse, presumably to begin implementing her recommendations. The official record shows that the team never returned from this visit. After 3 days with no contact, a search party was dispatched to the hollow. They found the state vehicle abandoned at the entrance to the hollow, but no sign of James or her companions. An extensive search operation lasting 2 weeks found no bodies, no blood evidence, not even footprints beyond the first quarter-mile of the hollow's main path. Sheriff's reports from the time document interviews with residents of neighboring hollows, several of whom reported hearing unusual screams on the afternoon of October 14th, described as not like normal human screaming, but rather like the sound of something being torn. No witnesses would agree to accompany officers further into Whitford territory. The disappearance of Eleanor James and her team sparked the largest law enforcement operation in Harlan County's history to that point. On November 2, 1954, a force consisting of 12 state troopers, 8 sheriff's deputies, and 6 FBI agents entered Whitford Hollow with a warrant to search all properties and detain family members for questioning. What they found, or rather, what they didn't find, defies easy explanation. The hollow was deserted. All cabins stood empty, though wood stoves were still warm, indicating recent habitation. Personal belongings remained in place, including clothing, tools, and family Bibles, with birth records dating back to 1870. Food was on tables, in some cases only partially eaten, but of the 40-plus Whitford family members believed to be living in the hollow, there was no sign. The FBI report, partially declassified in 1988, documents the thorough search of the entire 800-acre property. No graves were found containing recent bodies. No evidence of mass violence was discovered. The only potentially relevant finding was a series of tunnel entrances discovered in the root cellars of 3 separate cabins. These tunnels, roughly 4 feet in height and 3 feet wide, appeared to extend deep into the mountainside, but collapsed sections prevented complete exploration. FBI Special Agent Howard Richardson, who led the investigation, wrote in his final report, "The sudden disappearance of an entire extended family, leaving behind all possessions and providing no indicators of transportation method, presents a case without precedent in Bureau experience. The tunnel systems suggest a possible escape route, but their limited size and the absence of any exit point discovered, despite aerial surveillance, indicates they are more likely associated with unofficial mining activity than with the family's disappearance." The report concludes, "In the absence of bodies or evidence of foul play, and with no jurisdiction over voluntary disappearance, the Bureau is closing its active investigation. Local authorities are advised to maintain awareness for any reappearance of Whitford family members or reports of similar family groupings establishing residence in other remote areas." For 15 years, the Whitford case remained cold. The hollow stood abandoned, the cabins slowly reclaimed by the forest. Local legends grew around the empty settlement, with stories of hikers hearing voices in the woods, of hunters glimpsing pale figures watching from between trees, of strange lights seen deep in the hollow on moonless nights. But no official sightings of Whitford family members were documented. Then, in 1969, an unexpected development occurred. A man identifying himself as Samuel Whitford appeared at the Harlan County Courthouse to pay back taxes on the family property. The clerk who processed the transaction, Doris Wheeler, provided a statement to local newspaper the Harlan Daily Enterprise, describing the man as unnaturally thin, with unusual posture and speech patterns that made him difficult to understand. Wheeler noted that the man paid in cash, using gold coins dated from the 1920s and earlier. When asked where he and his family had been for the past 15 years, the man reportedly said only that they had gone deeper, but had always been there. Wheeler, disturbed by the encounter, notified the sheriff's office, but by the time deputies arrived, the man had departed. His existence was confirmed only by the payment record and Wheeler's testimony. This incident prompted renewed interest in the Whitford case. Sheriff Davis, newly appointed at the time, organized a small expedition to check whether the family had indeed returned to their hollow. His written report describes finding the original cabins still abandoned, but discovering evidence of habitation further up the hollow, beyond where previous searches had extended. Davis and his deputies located what appeared to be newly constructed shelters built partially into the mountainside, combining log walls with excavated cave entrances. These structures showed sophisticated design despite primitive materials, Davis wrote. Interior spaces extended far into the mountain, with complex ventilation systems allowing habitation deep underground. Evidence suggested multiple connected chambers capable of housing dozens of individuals. Most concerning were the modifications apparently designed to accommodate individuals of unusual physical dimensions, doorways of non-standard heights and widths, furniture with abnormal proportions. Davis's team found no Whitford family members during this expedition, though they reported sounds of movement deeper in the tunnel system. His report recommended establishing a permanent monitoring post at the hollow's entrance, but county commissioners denied funding for what they deemed unnecessary surveillance of empty land. Instead, periodic checks were instituted, with deputies visiting the site monthly throughout 1970. These checks revealed a disturbing pattern. Each time officers visited, they found evidence of ongoing habitation: fresh ashes in fire pits, animal bones showing recent butchering, occasionally footprints of unusual configuration, but never encountered any Whitford family members directly. It was as if the family could sense the approach of outsiders and retreat deeper into their underground network. By 1971, budget constraints led to the discontinuation of even these periodic checks. The Whitford Hollow was essentially abandoned to whatever presence might occupy it, with local residents generally understanding it as forbidden territory. Warning stories were passed to children: stay away from Whitford land, don't go into that hollow, the people there aren't right. And so the situation might have remained indefinitely, the Whitford family fading into local legend, were it not for the chance discovery that began our story. The photograph found during the demolition of the old records office in 1974 prompted historian Margaret Caldwell to launch her own investigation into the family's history, collecting oral histories from elderly residents and searching for documentation that might have been overlooked. What Caldwell discovered, and what ultimately led to her abandonment of the project, was a pattern that extended far beyond one isolated family. Through meticulous research, she identified multiple branches of the Whitford lineage that had apparently separated from the main family in the early 1900s, establishing themselves in other remote areas across Kentucky, West Virginia, and Tennessee. These splinter groups maintained the same patterns of isolation and intermarriage, creating what Caldwell described in her notes as a web of consanguinity spanning the most inaccessible regions of the Appalachian Mountains. Most disturbing was Caldwell's discovery of medical records from various rural clinics and midwives documenting births of Whitford-related infants with increasingly extreme deformities. A midwife's journal from McDowell County, West Virginia, described delivering a child in 1962 to a mother whose own surname was given as Whitford. Infant presented with translucent skin through which internal organs clearly visible. Skull structure entirely abnormal, with facial features misaligned and additional orifice above normal eye placement. Most concerning was movement pattern post-delivery. Infant capable of rotating head beyond normal human range and demonstrated unusual coordination of limb movements. Family refused all further medical intervention, departing before proper documentation could be completed. Similar accounts emerged from rural Tennessee, eastern Kentucky, and southwestern Virginia, all describing children born to families connected to the Whitford lineage, all exhibiting similar extreme abnormalities, all vanishing from medical oversight immediately after birth. What was happening to these children after they left medical care? Where were they being taken? And how had this pattern continued for decades without triggering systematic investigation? The answer, Caldwell discovered, lay partly in deliberate administrative obstruction. Her notes, found in her abandoned research files after her disappearance in 1976, document her growing realization that certain officials across multiple counties had actively suppressed investigations into the Whitford family. Records were misfiled, reports went unaddressed, follow-ups were cancelled without explanation. There appears to be a systematic protection of these families, she wrote in her final journal entry dated March 18, 1976. I've identified 7 different county officials, 3 state police captains, and 2 federal agents who have directly intervened to halt investigations. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental. The question is no longer what the Whitfords are hiding, but who is helping them hide it and why. 3 days after writing this entry, Margaret Caldwell drove to Whitford Hollow, reportedly to photograph the abandoned structures as part of her research. Her car was found at the hollow's entrance, Caldwell herself was never seen again. Her disappearance was investigated by the Kentucky State Police, but no evidence of foul play was discovered, and the case was eventually classified as a presumed accidental death, despite the absence of a body. Caldwell's research materials were placed in storage at the Harlan County Historical Society, where they remained largely untouched until our investigation began 3 years ago. It was among these materials that we found the map that would lead to the most disturbing discovery yet, a map on which Caldwell had marked not just the original Whitford Hollow, but 27 other locations across 5 states, each labeled with variations of the Whitford name and dates ranging from 1870 to 1975. Following Caldwell's map, our investigation took us deep into the most remote regions of Appalachia. At location after location, we found the same pattern: abandoned homesteads, evidence of hasty departure, and always, somewhere on the property, entrances to tunnel systems extending deep into the mountains. Local residents near these locations shared similar stories: strange sounds at night, glimpses of pale figures, livestock disappearing, and a generalized fear of entering certain hollows or crossing certain ridgelines. But it was what we found in McDowell County, West Virginia, at a location Caldwell had marked as Whitford Tertiary Settlement 4, STU 1912, that finally began to provide answers. There, in what appeared to be an abandoned coal mine shaft that had been converted into a living space, we discovered a locked metal cabinet partially buried under a collapsed section of wall. Inside the cabinet were hundreds of handwritten journals, medical records, and most disturbingly, photographs documenting what can only be described as a deliberate breeding program spanning 5 generations of Whitford family members. The materials detailed a systematic effort to produce children with specific physical traits that went far beyond what would normally result from inbreeding alone. Dr. Helena Schaefer, geneticist at Johns Hopkins University, reviewed copies of these records. What's described here isn't random genetic drift or typical consanguinity effects, she explained. This appears to be a deliberate selection for specific mutations, particularly those affecting skeletal structure, joint flexibility, and neurological development. The records track these traits with scientific precision, using terminology that wouldn't have been common knowledge in rural communities during this period. The journals describe successful manifestations and reversions to standard form, tracking physical traits across generations with clinical detachment. Most disturbing are references to the deeper adaptation and preparation for the below spaces, suggesting some purpose behind these physical modifications. The final journal, dated 1968, includes the ominous statement, "Third phase adaptation now self-sustaining across 17 family branches. Surface dwelling no longer necessary within 1 generation." What exactly were the Whitfords adapting to? The answer appears to lie in the tunnel systems discovered at every Whitford settlement. These weren't simply escape routes or hiding places, they were new habitats. The journals describe an ongoing effort to establish permanent dwellings deep underground, in cave systems that apparently extend throughout the Appalachian mountain range. Geological surveys confirm the existence of extensive limestone cave networks throughout the region, many of which remain unmapped due to their inaccessibility. Speleologist Dr. James Forrester of the U.S. Geological Survey reviewed our findings and confirmed that the locations marked on Caldwell's map correspond to areas with particularly extensive subterranean systems. What's remarkable is that many of these cave networks shouldn't be connected. They're separated by significant geological barriers, Dr. Forrester explained. But if these journals are accurate, the Whitford family has spent generations creating artificial connections, essentially engineering an underground highway system linking previously isolated cave networks across 5 states. But why? What would drive a family to not only retreat underground, but to systematically modify their own genetics to better adapt to subterranean existence? The journals provide conflicting explanations. Some entries speak of religious visions, of divine instruction to go below and prepare the deeper kingdom. Others suggest a more pragmatic motivation: fear of persecution, desire for complete isolation, resistance to government oversight. The most disturbing passages, however, suggest something else entirely: that the Whitfords didn't choose the caves, but were chosen by something already dwelling within them. Multiple journals reference the calling from below and those who were there before describing dreams shared across family members in which they showed us how to change, how to become suitable. Could these references be understood as manifestations of shared psychosis, as collective delusions spread through an isolated community? Perhaps. But this explanation fails to account for the physical evidence, the sophisticated tunnel systems, the precisely documented physical changes across generations, and most significantly, the continued disappearance of dozens of individuals who, by all rights, should still exist somewhere. Our investigation took an unexpected turn 6 months ago when we received an anonymous package containing a digital memory card. The card held a single video file, footage from what appeared to be a mining company's exploratory drone sent deep into an abandoned shaft in Wise County, Virginia, another location marked on Caldwell's map. The footage begins conventionally enough, showing narrow tunnels and typical mine features. Approximately 6 minutes into the exploration, however, the drone enters a larger chamber that shows clear signs of habitation, crude furniture, storage containers, fire pits with ventilation systems. As the drone proceeds deeper, the signs of habitation become more extensive and more recent. At the 9-minute mark, the drone's light illuminates a figure moving quickly away from the camera, deeper into the tunnel system. The figure is humanoid but moves with an unusual gait, almost spider-like in its lateral flexibility. The drone operator, heard faintly in the background, expresses shock and directs the drone to follow. What follows is approximately 3 minutes of pursuit through increasingly narrow tunnels. The figure is glimpsed several times, always moving just at the edge of the drone's light range. Its physical proportions become clearer: unnaturally elongated limbs, a torso capable of extreme compression, and a head that appears to rotate beyond normal human range of motion. The final 30 seconds of footage show the drone entering a vast chamber where multiple similar figures can be seen moving among structures that appear to be dwellings built directly into the cave walls. As the drone advances, the figures become aware of it. The last frame shows dozens of pale, distorted faces turning simultaneously toward the camera, before the video abruptly ends. We have been unable to identify the mining company that captured this footage or the individuals operating the drone. Inquiries to all active mining operations in Wise County have been met with denials. The exact location of the shaft entrance remains unknown. This video, if authentic, provides the first concrete evidence that the Whitford family, or what they have become, continues to exist, having completed their transition to a fully subterranean existence. The physical adaptations visible in the footage align precisely with the third phase adaptations described in the journals: elongated limbs with additional joint flexibility, compressed torsos capable of navigating narrow spaces, enhanced night vision, and skin with reduced pigmentation. But questions remain. How many individuals currently live in this underground network? How extensive is their territory? And perhaps most importantly, are they still human in any meaningful sense of the word? Recent geological survey data offers disturbing possibilities. Ground-penetrating radar studies conducted over the past decade for resource extraction planning have identified anomalous tunnel systems throughout the Appalachian range that don't correspond to known mining activities or natural cave formations. These tunnels appear to follow patterns that maximize interconnectivity while minimizing detection from the surface. Many extend to depths exceeding 1,000 feet, far deeper than typical coal mining operations would reach. More concerning are the seismic anomalies recorded at multiple monitoring stations throughout the region. Dr. Eleanor Chen of the U.S. Geological Survey described these readings as consistent with organized excavation activity, occurring at depths ranging from 500 to 1,500 feet. What's unusual, Dr. Chen noted, is that these readings lack the signatures we'd expect from mechanical excavation equipment. Whatever is creating these tunnels isn't using conventional machinery. Local residents throughout the region continue to report unusual phenomena: strange sounds emanating from abandoned mine shafts, unexplained vibrations felt through the ground at night, and, most alarmingly, the occasional disappearance of individuals who venture too far into remote areas. While many of these disappearances can be attributed to the hazardous terrain, others leave puzzling evidence behind, such as personal belongings arranged in precise geometric patterns, or footprints that suddenly terminate as if the individual simply vanished. The most recent such disappearance occurred just 4 months ago. Hiker David Morales was reported missing after failing to return from a solo expedition near an abandoned mining area in Bell County, Kentucky, another location marked on Caldwell's map as a Whitford settlement. Search and rescue teams found Morales's backpack and camera at the entrance to an old mine shaft. The camera contained dozens of photos, including several showing what appears to be a narrow tunnel extending beyond the mine's original excavation, with fresh tool marks visible on the walls. The final 3 images on Morales's camera are the most disturbing. They show what appears to be a human figure at the far end of a tunnel, illuminated only by the camera's flash. Each successive photo shows the figure closer to the camera, though never clearly enough to discern detailed features. In the final image, the figure appears to be only a few feet from the lens, but the photo is badly blurred, as if the camera moved suddenly at the moment of exposure. Forensic analysis suggests the 3 photos were taken within a span of 12 seconds, requiring the figure to move approximately 40 feet through difficult terrain in that brief time. Morales's body has not been found. The mine shaft entrance collapsed the day after the discovery of his equipment, preventing further exploration. County officials attributed the collapse to natural causes, despite structural analysis suggesting a deliberate detonation. This pattern of discovery, followed by convenient obstruction, has repeated throughout our investigation. Sites identified through Caldwell's research become inaccessible shortly after we document their existence. Individuals willing to share information about the Whitford family suddenly recant their statements or refuse further contact. Official records related to our inquiries go missing from county offices. Most troubling was the break-in at our research headquarters 3 months ago. Nothing of apparent value was taken. Computer equipment, cameras, and recording devices were left untouched. The only items missing were Caldwell's original map and a collection of soil samples gathered from various Whitford settlement sites. Our backup digital files remained intact, but the physical evidence, which had been scheduled for laboratory analysis, vanished without explanation. Local law enforcement showed little interest in investigating the break-in thoroughly. Sheriff Thomas Reynolds of Harlan County dismissed our concerns, suggesting that old papers and dirt samples aren't exactly high-value targets for professional thieves. When pressed about the unusual selectivity of the theft, Reynolds advised us to let sleeping dogs lie and suggested that some old stories are better left untold. This reluctance to investigate extends beyond local authorities. When we attempted to bring our findings to federal agencies, we encountered similar institutional resistance. FBI field offices in Kentucky, West Virginia, and Tennessee all declined to open investigations, citing insufficient evidence of federal crimes. Freedom of Information Act requests regarding any previous federal investigation of the Whitford family have been denied under various exemptions, including ongoing investigation status, directly contradicting the field office's claims that no investigation exists. This systematic obstruction suggests something beyond simple bureaucratic inertia. Someone or some group appears to have a vested interest in maintaining the mystery surrounding the Whitford family and their underground activities. But who would benefit from such concealment? The journals discovered in McDowell County offer one disturbing possibility. Among the later entries dated 1967 is a reference to the arrangement and those who keep the surface world ignorant. The entry describes periodic exchanges and valuable information provided in return for continued secrecy. What exactly was being exchanged? What information could a family of genetically altered cave dwellers possibly provide that would warrant protection from multiple government agencies? The journals don't offer clear answers, but they do contain repeated references to deep readings, the ancient resonance, and knowing what sleeps below. One entry cryptically notes, "They fear what we have found deeper than they fear what we have become." Geological records may provide context for these statements. The Appalachian mountain range is among the oldest on Earth, formed over 300 million years ago. Its deep cave systems contain fossils and mineral formations that record Earth's history across geological epochs. Could the Whitford family, in their subterranean exploration, have discovered something of scientific significance? Something valuable enough to warrant official protection and secrecy? Dr. Miriam Kaplan, geologist and paleontologist at the University of Kentucky, offers a more concrete hypothesis. The deepest Appalachian cave systems extend into rock formations that predate most of our fossil record, she explained. There are entire strata down there that we've barely studied because of their inaccessibility. If a group of people had been systematically exploring and mapping these areas for generations, they might have access to paleontological and geological data that would be immensely valuable to certain government research programs. This scientific explanation seems plausible, but fails to account for the more disturbing aspects of the Whitford phenomenon: the deliberate genetic modifications, the reported supernatural elements, and the continuous disappearances. If scientific discovery were the sole motivation, why the extreme physical adaptations? Why the cult-like references to those who were there before? An alternative explanation emerges from the region's industrial history. The Appalachian Mountains have been aggressively mined for coal, natural gas, and various minerals for over a century. This extraction has created environmental and health crises throughout the region, from contaminated groundwater to toxic air pollution. Is it possible that the Whitford family, in their underground exploration, discovered evidence of more severe contamination than has been publicly acknowledged? Environmental scientist Dr. Robert Chen reviewed water and soil samples we collected from several former Whitford settlements. His analysis revealed abnormal concentrations of heavy metals and chemical compounds associated with resource extraction, but also something more puzzling. Some of these soil samples contain organic compounds I can't readily identify, Dr. Chen reported. They don't match known contaminants from mining or industrial processes. Their molecular structure suggests biological origin, possibly fungal, but unlike any species currently in our databases. Could these unknown biological compounds be related to the physical changes documented in the Whitford family? Could generations of exposure to these substances have triggered mutations that the family subsequently cultivated through selective breeding? This would provide a scientific framework for understanding what might otherwise be attributed to supernatural causes. Yet this explanation still doesn't account for the apparent protection the family has received from authorities, nor the systematic obstruction of investigations into their activities. If the Whitfords were victims of environmental contamination, exposing their condition would be more likely to trigger lawsuits and regulatory action than a coordinated cover-up. Unless, of course, what they discovered underground wasn't just evidence of pollution, but something deliberately hidden. The journals contain scattered references to government workings and the deeper laboratories in entries from the 1950s and 60s, the height of the Cold War, when many classified research facilities were established in remote locations. Declassified Defense Department documents confirm that several underground research installations were constructed throughout Appalachia during this period, officially for coal research and geological studies. Many of these facilities were later abandoned or repurposed, their original functions obscured by bureaucratic reclassification. Could the Whitford family have discovered one such facility during their subterranean expansion? Might they have been exposed to experimental materials or compounds being tested there? This would explain both the unusual biological changes and the government's interest in suppressing investigation, but raises even more disturbing questions about what exactly was being researched in these hidden laboratories. Former Defense Department analyst Walter Simmons, speaking on condition of anonymity, offered a chilling assessment. During the Cold War, there were research programs that operated completely off the books, with funding channeled through multiple front organizations. Some of these programs involved experimentation with chemical and biological agents that could enhance human performance or create specialized capabilities. The records of these programs were deliberately fragmented to prevent comprehensive oversight. If civilians encountered evidence of these programs, standard protocol would have been containment and disinformation, not acknowledgement. While Simmons could not confirm specific operations in the Appalachian region, he noted that the area's geographical features, isolated populations, limited access, natural barriers to observation, would have made it ideal for classified research. If you wanted to conduct experiments that could never see the light of day, he said, you couldn't design a better location than those mountains. This theory, that the Whitford family encountered government experiments underground and were subsequently either contained or co-opted to maintain secrecy, addresses many of the puzzling aspects of their story. It explains the official obstruction, the family's genetic abnormalities, and their transition to a fully subterranean existence. It doesn't, however, explain the older elements of the mystery, the patterns that predate modern government research by decades. The journals from the earliest period, 1870 through 1900, contain no references to government facilities or modern contaminants. Instead, they describe something older, the ancient ones beneath, those who taught the first Whitfords to listen to the deep earth, and cryptically, the bargain made in blood and bone. These entries suggest that whatever the Whitford family encountered underground predated modern intervention, that perhaps the government facilities were built where they were precisely because of what was already there. Local indigenous histories may provide context for these earlier references. Dr. Rebecca Tolbear, anthropologist and member of the Cherokee Nation, has studied oral traditions regarding the Appalachian mountain range. Multiple indigenous nations have stories about these mountains being places where the boundary between worlds is thin, Dr. Tolbear explained. The Cherokee have traditions about underground beings called the Nunahi, who could move between their world and ours. Similar stories exist across other tribes from this region. Indigenous knowledge systems often encoded practical information about real phenomena within frameworks that Europeans classified as mythology. When these stories speak of underground beings or thin places between worlds, they may be describing actual geological features, unusual biological organisms, or natural phenomena that weren't understood within the scientific framework of the time. Could the Whitford family have encountered something preserved in these indigenous traditions? These weren't just myths to the people who lived here. They were understood as descriptions of actual encounters. Dr. Tolbear emphasized that these traditions shouldn't be dismissed as mere superstition, something that predated European settlement and modern scientific understanding. The earliest journals suggest as much, describing the old ones who were here before any man walked above, and those who taught us to hear the deep stone speaking. This layered mystery, ancient encounters overlaid with modern government intervention, may explain the seemingly contradictory elements of the Whitford phenomenon. The family's initial retreat underground may have been prompted by contact with something preserved in indigenous knowledge, but forgotten or dismissed by settler society. Their subsequent physical changes may have begun as adaptations to subterranean living, later accelerated by exposure to modern contaminants or experimental compounds. The government's involvement may have come much later, an attempt to contain or exploit whatever the family had discovered. What remains clear is that something continues to exist beneath the Appalachian Mountains, something that has transformed the Whitford family from rural isolationists into fully subterranean beings. Whether this transformation represents an evolutionary adaptation, the effect of unknown contaminants, the result of deliberate experimentation, or something more inexplicable, cannot be determined from available evidence. What we can confirm is that the tunnel systems identified in our investigation continue to expand. Seismic monitoring over the past year has detected excavation activity at increasing depths, now reaching below 2,000 feet in some areas. Whatever the Whitford family has become, they are pushing deeper into the ancient mountains with each passing year. Local residents continue to report unusual phenomena. Strange sounds emanating from abandoned mine shafts, unexplained vibrations felt through the ground at night, glimpses of pale, elongated figures at the edges of remote properties. Most reports come from areas marked on Caldwell's map, but some emerge from locations previously unconnected to the Whitford phenomenon, suggesting expansion beyond their traditional territory. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports of children going missing for brief periods and returning changed. In the past 5 years, 7 cases have been documented across the region. Children vanishing for hours or days, later found wandering near mine entrances or cave systems, unable or unwilling to explain their absence. Parents report subtle differences in these children after their return. Unusual sensitivity to light, changed sleep patterns, and in some cases, improved ability to navigate in darkness. Medical examinations of these children have revealed subtle physiological changes, increased rod cell density in the retina, enhanced joint flexibility, and in 2 cases, the beginning of additional digit formation, small protuberances at the base of the existing fingers that X-rays confirm contain developing bone structure. When questioned about these changes, the children provide similar responses, despite having no contact with each other. The people under the mountain are changing us so we can visit them. County Child Protective Services have investigated these cases, but found no evidence of conventional abuse or neglect. The parents of these children appear genuinely distressed by the changes they observe. Medical professionals have proposed various explanations, from rare genetic disorders to environmental exposures, but none account for the consistency of the changes across geographically separated cases, nor the temporal connection to the children's disappearances. Are these children being deliberately altered by contact with the Whitford family? Is this the beginning of a new phase in whatever process has been unfolding beneath these mountains for generations? The journal's references to preparing the way and bringing more into the deep places take on disturbing new significance in light of these incidents. Our investigation has reached an impasse. Official channels remain closed to us. Key physical evidence has been stolen or destroyed. Witnesses become unreachable after initial contact. Even our digital records have been compromised. 3 separate security breaches in our research database have occurred in the past month alone, targeting files specifically related to the most recent child disappearances and the tunnel system mapping. What we can share is this record of our findings, incomplete as it is. The Whitford family represents something unprecedented, a multi-generational transformation from isolated rural community to subterranean dwelling population with physical adaptations that defy conventional explanation. Their story intersects with indigenous history, government secrecy, environmental contamination, and possibly something older and stranger than any of these. For those who dismiss this investigation as mere sensation or superstition, we offer this final piece of evidence. 2 weeks ago, an envelope was delivered to our research office. It contained no return address, no note of explanation, just a single photograph and a small object wrapped in waxed paper. The photograph shows a tunnel entrance partially obscured by fallen rock, with a figure just visible in the shadows beyond. The figure appears to be watching the camera, its proportions subtly wrong, limbs too long, head too angular, fingers with too many joints. The image is dated 3 days before delivery, taken with a digital camera, and geotagged to a location in Wise County, Virginia, less than 5 miles from the original Whitford Hollow. The object wrapped in waxed paper was a finger bone, unnaturally elongated, with an additional joint not present in normal human anatomy. DNA analysis confirmed human origin, but with significant genetic divergence, including novel mutations in genes controlling bone formation and joint development. Whatever the Whitfords have become continues to exist. Whatever drove them underground continues to influence them. And whatever has protected their secret for over a century continues to obstruct full investigation. The mountains keep their secrets. The tunnels continue to expand. And somewhere in the darkness beneath Appalachia, something watches and waits. Something that was once a family named Whitford, but may now be something else entirely. For those living in the shadow of these mountains, a word of caution. Pay attention to the ground beneath your feet. Listen for unusual sounds in the night. Watch for pale figures at the edge of your property. And if your children speak of the people under the mountain or show unusual interest in caves or abandoned mines, do not dismiss their stories. Some hollows are best left unexplored, some histories are better left unexamined, and some families, like the Whitfords, are perhaps better left to the darkness they have chosen, or that has chosen them. This concludes our current investigation into the Whitford family phenomenon. Further updates will be provided as new evidence emerges, if we remain able to share it. Already there are signs that this report may be suppressed. Unusual interference with our communications, surveillance of our research facilities, pressure on our financial backers to withdraw support. If you are reading these words, it means something of our work has survived. Whether that represents success or failure in the larger sense remains to be seen. The truth about what lies beneath these ancient mountains may be more disturbing than any of us are prepared to accept. In the darkness below Appalachia, the Whitfords are still digging deeper,